Welcome back to the Present Stage Conversations with Theater Writers. My name is Dan Rubins, and I'm a theater critic, composer, and arts nonprofit leader. And my guest today is Donald Margulies, the Pulitzer Prize winning playwright of Dinner with Friends, which won that award in 2000. He's also the playwright of the play he's talking about today, Lunar Eclipse, a new play produced by Second Stage, running at Signature Theater through June 22nd. And he's also my former playwriting professor from college, so it was a particular thrill to get to chat with him 10 years after taking his course. I'm particularly grateful to him as well because this is the first episode of The Present Stage that will be streaming not only on audio platforms, but also on YouTube. So if you are on an audio platform and prefer to see our faces on the YouTube channel, please check out The Present Stage on YouTube. Leave a comment, subscribe, kick us off there. I'm excited to see how that goes. And Lunar Eclipse is a play set in a rural field where a couple that's been married for 50 years watches an eclipse together. And as they do so, they go deeper in their conversation about their lives and their marriage and their time together than they ever have before. And it was really a treat to get to unpack this play with Donald Margulies. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Pulitzer Prize winning and my former playwriting professor, playwright Donald Margulies. Donald Margulies, welcome to the Present Stage.
Well, I'm happy to see you.
Yeah, so we have met each other in the past. I, as an undergraduate, studied playwriting with you exactly 10 years ago. Um,
Hmm.
and I wanted to start by asking you about your teaching and its impact on your playwriting. How do you feel like your long career as a teacher of playwriting has informed your craft and sort of shaped the work that you've done?
That's a really interesting question. I've been teaching for 35 years. That's a long time.
Hmm.
And I find that it what's useful about teaching is that it gets writers, particularly teachers of writing, it gets writers talking about the work that has inspired them. And in communicating that to students, you get to experience vicariously the discovery of things that were inspiring to you when you were first coming of age as a writer. And I think that that's one of the joys of teaching is that you get to have this kind of vicarious thrill of introducing things that still uh, inspire and exhilarate and bestow this on a new generation of students. So I've been doing this for 35 years. That's a generation. And, students have gone on to all kinds of illustrious careers in film and television and education and other areas. And it's a very gratifying payback for all of the years that I've put in.
Yeah, and I feel like the sort of reading list for that course has really stuck with me. That was the first time
Really?
I'd read Angels in America. First time I'd read Mammoth, and recently reviewed Glengarry Glen Ross and went back to my notes from your course to see how I'd sort of first reacted to the play. And we read Doubt in your class, I think, and I
That's
went
right.
back some of the questions I had written down. Then when I interviewed John Patrick Shanley about a year ago on the podcast, I went back and asked him some of the questions that I'd written down in your course 10 years ago.
That-
So
That's great.
um, definitely sort of absolutely the sort of exposure to the plays that inspired you stuck with me as well. Um,
That's
and
great. Great to hear.
moving on to Lunar Eclipse specifically, I know that you write in the script that the play is dedicated to your father-in-law.
Mhm.
So I'd love to start there and ask you sort of where you locate him in the play and sort of what aspects of his story were you interested in responding to or representing?
Well, there are my father-in-law, with whom I was very close. We had a very special kind of unlikely bond. He was a Republican Episcopalian Kentucky farmer, and here I am, this Brooklyn Jew.
Hmm.
Uh, and my wife and I have been together for 46 years, so we did have a quite a foundation of building a friendship. He's been dead for 15 of those years now. But I decided that I wanted to write a play that had no furniture in it, I was getting tired of plays that had furniture in it. So so where I landed in trying to imagine what that space would look like was a field. And then I placed that field on a farm. And then I decided, well, why not just embrace the farm that I know and had walked on, which was my wife's family's farm, where her grandfather and her father farmed for most of their lives. And so it became much more based in that experience. Um, my father-in-law is not the character in the play, but I could not have written it without knowing him, if
Mm,
that makes sense,
yeah.
without having a sort of a foundation or a sense of the DNA of the character of George, as my father-in-law was named. The character in the play is named George, but the the other influence for the play was Our Town, uh, where I began to a play that I love and had the great thrill of introducing in a new HarperCollins edition.
Mm.
And what I began to imagine was what if George and Emily in Our Town actually lived to grow old together? Just that notion is a kind of prompt, you know? And I was very excited by that idea. So between the George Gibbs of Our Town and the George Street that I knew, I created my own version of a George, of an American George, um, and uh, and brought him to life on this stage. This little piece of farm that we've been able to put on stage that Walt Spangler solved for us, for Kate Wariski and for me, and um, and that's really where it started.
Yeah, that Our Town, I hadn't made the George and Emily connection, and now I feel like I want to go back to the script and sort of study it for sort of how that sort of imaginatively plays out. Was that something that you sort of kind of took literally in moments of the play, or just sort of used as kind of a spark initially to?
Well, it really it was a spark, but there are moments that I felt were resonating that I did not shirk. I embraced. I think there's at one point in and incidentally, the characters in my play are identified in the text as George and M. They never refer to one another by their names. But just for our purposes
Yeah,
of reading a playbill or reading a script, that is how I identify them instead of as A and B. They are
right.
George and M. But I think that there were moments of Thornton Wilder that sort of crept in here. The fascination with the sky and the moon and the elements were very much a part of the world of Thornton Wilder's Our Town. There's a line in the play. There's a line in Thornton Wilder where in the cemetery scene where I forget the character's name, but he talks about how his son knew the stars, and I adopted that when Emily tells George that and let's not forget, you knew the stars, which is a mighty powerful bait when you're trying to catch a girl. And so there are those kinds of Easter eggs that are uh, dappled throughout, not I hope not overtly and not coyly, but they're there. I didn't want to deny those moments when they did occur to me. I just said, well, why not?
And I think now, and I have a couple of questions now coming up that I'm going to reframe in the Our Town context. One of which is you've sort of granted George, at least he believes that he knows sort of the future of how they'll die and how their lives will play out, which is sort of kind of a little bit of our town's sort of past, present, future sort of playing out across, even though we're sort of within one play, we sort of get the past and we get their future and their afterlife sort of all playing out in there. Was that it was interesting because um, a friend of mine who saw the same performance as I did, sort of described that moment or that speech where George describes their deaths as magical realism.
Yes.
And I think you could take it that way. You could also take it sort of as just a man who's saying that he knows this and you can believe him or not. did you sort of, I mean, I don't want to necessarily ask you like, is he right or not, but how did you sort of come to that moment or approach the writing of that speech?
Well, like your friend, I did define that moment as a kind of magical realism. Because the play, by design, by inspiration, is such an elemental play, existential, elemental, the heavens, the earth, the planet. I thought, well, why not? Why not sort of break certain expectations? And why not imbue George with this power, this magic of seeing the future and seeing how the ends of their lives look? I have done this before. I must confess. In my play, The Loman Family Picnic, there is a very prosaic exchange between husband and wife over a very boring meal that sort of explodes into this kind of moment. It's for different effect, obviously, but I guess it's something that I have been uh, dealing with in my writing for a long time. But death is so much a part of the construct of lunar eclipse. The end of life, the beginning of life, growing things. Um, so I thought, well, why not? Why not make that an element of the play as well?
And you also have this speech that George gives toward the end. You have several moments in the play that sort of zoom out from this couple contemplating their lives together to contemplating something much bigger. And he gives a speech at the end. People will wonder what grew here once historians, geologists, folks who spend their lives studying this stuff, what will they find? Sand and silt and clay and compost, dirt laced with chemicals, decades of harvests and plantings, and all of those dead dogs, which really does have a quite Thornton Wilderian sort of overtone of that really sort of, I guess you could say, astronomical kind of zooming out um, to look at not only sort of what's this intimate life that you're describing in such detail, but also sort of what is this a part of,
Right.
and what is sort of the timeline that this falls into. So I'm curious how you. It seems like our town kind of steeled you to feel confident in sort of making those gestures too. So I'm curious sort of how you approach those moments of kind of really big zooming out in a
Right.
way that might be unaccustomed or unexpected coming out of characters like these initially.
Yeah, well, but that's one of the lessons that I took from Our Town and from Thornton Wilder, uh, uh, whose play Our Town is really a seminal experience for me. But in teaching Our Town, I might have taught it the year
I
that you.
think, yeah, yeah, yeah. I think I
I
did read
usually
it in your
end
class.
my
Yeah.
course with Our Town because it's the
I
thing that
think I did read it with you.
use it
Yeah.
the most. So I think it's probably if it was 10 years ago, I think I was already doing this.
Yeah.
And when I teach Our Town, I teach it in tandem with Pullman Car Hiawatha, which is a Thornton Wilder one act, which also has a stage manager and also deals with the death of a young woman and also has all these themes that are being played with. They're part of the mix of what will become Our Town. And I call Pullman Car Hiawatha a proto play because all of the DNA of Our Town is really lurking in that play. And in that play, there are there's a fabulous monologue that is delivered by a German immigrant who worked on a bridge expanse, who died building the bridge. And so just the fact that there is that kind of intrusion in what is otherwise this kind of prosaic naturalistic world, was very uh, exciting to me. Why not? Why not do that? And so that is another reason why I decided to have George share his knowledge. And he calls it sometimes don't you just know something? And why not do that in a play that is so that deals with mortality? And I think, look, the other thing, Dan, is that I'm in my eighth decade now. And, I could not have written this play 10 or 20 years ago. I simply would not have had the inner resource to write this play, to contemplate the things that I have my
Mm.
characters dealing with. Um, or it would have felt very ersatz and false. But writing it at this stage of life, this stage of a career that spans 50 years from the age of 20 when I
Mhm.
wrote my first play in college when I was an art student, and just sort of tracking the whole continuum of a life, a career, a marriage, and that is really what informed the writing of this play.
And it feels too like this is a conversation or a a discourse that your characters may not have been ready for until we meet them, because it is sort of it feels like this is the first time, the first night that they've sort of unpacked, and they unpack deeper
Yes,
and deeper the weight that they've carried in their marriage together and separately, and uh and M asks at one point, "Have I ever surprised you? Ever? Truly, have I ever told you anything you didn't already know?" And I think the play is sort of slowly allowing them to like learn new things about each other. Like
yes,
it's
that's
sort of
right.
an unpeeling of the things they do know about each other until they start to get at something they didn't already know. Um, and I'm curious, sort of, in writing these two characters,
Hmm.
um, and only having these two voices to sort of juggle throughout the play's duration, how you thought about, um, kind of building the sense of intimacy between them, verbally, and sort of what that looks like, um,
Hmm.
and finding a language that felt both shared but also believably sort of distant at the same time.
Well, as a former student of mine, you probably remember my talking about the use of objects in plays. And, so in this play, something like a blanket or a thermos or a rock that is placed to mark the spot of a burial of a dog or the farm itself, or gazing at the moon becomes an object. So for these people to then be sort of finding their way, negotiating through these various objects, um, it sort of evolved naturally. Um, it's not simply sitting in a field talking. It's them interacting. It's them dealing with the earth, dealing with the sky, dealing with memory and the loss of memory. And so it's all of those things that are the ingredients of this exploration.
And I've had a number of conversations now with playwrights about the challenges of a two-hander and sort of how do you keep it going, especially when in a play like this, you have these sort of brief transitions, but it's essentially kind of one conversation. Um, how did what are the specific challenges that you worked through in this play and sort of keeping their conversation going, especially because, as you said, it's um it's not they're besides the moon, they're sort of reacting only to each other and not uh to sort of outside incidents that are occurring.
Right. Right. Well, I've written other two-handers, which are supposed to be, the something to be avoided or something. But none of my, I wrote collected stories, which is a two-hander, and I guess I have a couple of others in there too. But I've written certainly plenty of two-character scenes that are in a cast of four or six
Sure.
or eight. Um, but to try to sustain that for what now is about 82 minutes of stage
Mhm.
time, um, the thing that sort of gave me an armature was built into the conceit of the play, that they are there observing a lunar eclipse and that there are stages in a lunar eclipse. So that for me, the stages became almost um, musical movements in a piece of music. And so to sort of view, moon enters umbra, whatever. And that's my handwriting, by the way, that's projected on the stage. That was Kate Wariski's inspired idea,
Yeah.
which I thought, yeah, that's kind of
I like
cool.
that.
Um, and so that these demarcations gave me certain um, provided a certain rhythm to the play. I was also fascinated by with those transitions. I was almost viewing it in filmic terms, in cinematic terms, that these are just imagine, okay, we're here, and then there's a jump cut, and we are 5 minutes later, or 2 minutes later, or 10 minutes later. But let's just sort of track these moments, these isolated moments. And I think that's part of what uh, gave me the impetus to write it in these 7 stages plus a coda, essentially. And so that I'm a writer who always looks for structure. And the fact that it was sort of built into the event of the play, the structure itself is the event of the play, was very exciting to me.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting to think about the sort of the scenes following the the development of the eclipse itself. Um, and uh I'm curious in terms of the visual life of the play, since you mentioned that you were an art student and you alluded to this beautiful set by Walt Spengler, and then you also have like quite evocative lighting and video design in the piece as well.
Fantastic physical production.
Sort of
Yeah.
how much as a visual artist yourself, how much do you come into a production with a sense of you do have like quite detailed stage directions, both in terms of informing the actors' intentions, but also in terms of the visual life of the piece. But I'm curious sort of how much you come in with a visual sense of what the play should feel like, will look like. Um, compared to playwrights who don't have maybe that same like visual background themselves or training.
Well, it's sometimes a mixed blessing.
Yeah.
But with this production, and I am very delighted with this production. It was a joy to work with these people, with this director with whom I'd never worked before. And one of the great tributes to Kate Wariski as a director, she works with a team, basically a lot of people that she's done multiple productions with. And I think that's a really strong sign of leadership and vision in a director. And uh, and we had a lot of fun doing it. The fact that this, I should interject this, the fact that this is close to home, particularly for my wife, a farm girl,
Hmm.
who gave me multiple blessings to write this play as
Yeah.
I did and as it progressed. Um, she had very specific ideas about what it might look like. Not that she's saying it's got to do this,
Yeah.
but initially, I was very much in the Thornton Wilder mode and saying, we could just have 2 chairs on stage. We don't have to have anything else.
Mm.
And that's essentially the ethos of our town, is you could just do it with a couple of chairs.
Yeah.
And it could be done with a couple of chairs. But, I think one of the considerations with this particular production was the expanse of that proscenium at the Diamond at the Signature Center, which is vast.
Yeah. A very wide stage.
And we needed to create an environment to make it feel like people, when they enter the theater, are entering an environment like a planetarium kind of
Mm.
feeling.
Yeah.
I think that is achieved, not in a overly precious way, but I do think it feels like you're entering into a diorama.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's great. And Walt and Kate were working in tandem, and I would give notes and or respond to things, or Kate would not be perhaps pleased with where they were and protect me from a phase of the development. But to their credit as collaborators, and Walt in particular as a um, just a wonderful guy, and he has his own connection to farm from his own family background. So he had his own, sort of basis for what the images should look like. Initially he had them in a cornfield, and my reaction was, "You're not going to bury dogs in a cornfield. Corn has got to grow in a cornfield. So this has to be sort of adjacent to, but not
Mm. Yeah.
literally the cornfield. So, we went through those kinds of, you know, geographical changes. And I think that what he ultimately came up with, and the work of our brilliant video designer and sound designer and the music, I mean, it's a beautifully wrought, lovingly wrought production. Um, but I didn't want to be too hands-on with the development of the set because I trust these people
Yeah.
in collaboration. And I would give notes, and my wife would give me notes to give notes. And I think that it really benefited the overall tone of this New York premiere.
My other question about the rehearsal process and the production process was your terrific cast, Reed Birney and Lisa Emery. Um, I'm curious how much of the characters emerged from working with them and on them. How much did you find new sort of approaches to those characters in text wise in hearing their voices on the play?
Well, the thing about, I mean, one of the things I love about particularly the early days of a rehearsal process, when actors are still finding their way, is, and actors will tell you this, that I'm known as a syllable counter. So that if I'm hearing a line or lines or a speech over and over again, and it's not quite flowing properly, it's usually my fault. And by fault, I mean I've indulged putting in a couple of syllables that I really don't need. And it's when the rhythms are not what I imagine, or the actor is stumbling over something that, yeah, I understand I gave you a pothole there that I have to remove. Then it becomes part of the collaborative process where I prune and weed, um, and that is very much part of the rehearsal process for me. In the case of this play, I created the role of George, yes, with my father-in-law, sort of and gave me an effigy.
Hmm.
But I've thought of Reed. Um, Reed and I have been acquainted for 40 years in the American theater, never worked together until this play. He will tell you, if you were to speak to him, about all of the auditions for my plays that he didn't, and he'll remember maybe even the days and maybe even the sides that he had to. But I always liked his work. I always admired his work. And when this play was just beginning to come into form, I really had not a lot of material at this point. I was beginning to imagine it. And I ran into Reed, and he was having a bad day and said, I'm never doing a play again. I'm not telling you anything he wouldn't tell you himself, and wouldn't tell the man on the street himself either, because he's very comfortable with his emotions. He said, oh, I'm not going to work in theater again. I said, what are you talking about? Of course you're going to work. He said, no, Donald, I've had it. Oh, and I said, well, give me a minute because I think I'm working on something for you. And then I went away for, I don't know, he'll tell you exactly how long, but it was a period of time, and COVID hit around that time. And I wasn't writing every day. I was doing collage a lot, which is what I still do to this day. Because writing a play during COVID didn't really, to me, make a lot of sense. It was like, what am I doing? Who is this for, and when
Yeah.
will it be? And so I put that on pause. But when I finally did get back to it, Reed Birney took residence in my head as this play was coming into full life. So when I finished a draft and I sent it off to Reed, I said, remember that play that I told you? He said he had no recollection of the conversation, which made me say, then what am I doing here? Yeah.
Yeah.
But but he responded within hours to the how the play worked and resonated for him. And I left him in the part. Now, the thing about Lisa is that Lisa was not with the original production. And Lisa is an actor I worked with 26 years ago on the New York premiere of Dinner with Friends.
Mm.
So when we were beginning to talk about who should be our co-star, Lisa's name came up, and it was like, this is an inspired idea for a playwright and actor to reunite 26 years after this play that was a breakthrough for both of us, in a sense, about marriage, midlife marriage. And now here we are, 26 years later, with late life marriage and issues of mortality and memory and all of those things. So there was just something very organic and fitting to having Lisa appear in this play at this moment in time. It seemed very right.
Yeah. And both of them have such a sort of natural sort of affinity for the language of the play too, it feels like.
I,
Um,
I think they do, and they've really found a comfort zone on stage. You saw it Wednesday night. I'm trying to remember what was Wednesday night. Um, uh, we had like a telephone ringing one night or something I
mhm.
heard. But yes, they have developed a wonderful ease on stage, which is great to see.
And I want to ask you, you can decide how much you want to give away in your response, but I want to ask you about the coda that you mentioned. Um, and sort of at what point in writing the play did you know that you would land there? Was it always clear sort of where you would visit in that final moment and how
Well,
that would sort of happen?
Dan, you probably know a few of my plays, and I jump around in time a fair amount, not consistently, and it's not a motif, but it's something I have played with. And when I was first conjuring with breaking the fourth wall and them going back and forth in time within the setting that we were in, and I decided that that's where this story needed to land. I I needed to send my audience home with this, and because it's a sad play, and I mean there's a lot of humor, and there's a lot of levity, there's a lot of recognizable behavior in it, but this coda, which is becomes a very bittersweet kind of snapshot. Um, I I wanted to send my audience off with that. It's yeah, that's where it came from.
And I have one more question for you, which is a question I've been asking a number of the folks on my podcast. I had asked this first of Rajiv Joseph, who suggested I ask it of everyone.
Uh-huh.
But as the intro to this question, I'm going to read, if you don't mind, a short speech from the play um, that George gives, where he says, "What if this time the forces of evil are here to stay? They won, poisoned this land and everything that grows on it and lives off it, got everybody at their neighbors' throats, and they got to burn up the planet and mess up our children's minds. And this is it. This is the way it's going to be. Whatever idea everybody had that they're going to be different, they're going to be better than everybody who came before them, turns out not to be true, might not, might never have been true." And so the question that I've been asking is, what is the role of theater in slowing down the apocalypse?
Oh boy. I, I don't know that that's possible. But that speech, which resonates more now than it did 2 years ago, um, came out of a real fear. And I think the mere expression of these emotions and the way that George articulates this in his way um, felt like an perhaps an eye-opening experience for audiences. I don't know that I can stave off an apocalypse, but I think that, and look, it's just going to sound as trite as can be, but one of the joys of theater is the communal experience of putting life on stage in its myriad forms, and and to have people see themselves or echoes of things they've thought or said, and perhaps see it in a new light and a new frame in a new environment with other people who are nodding and maybe crying and maybe elbowing their partner. That I think is part of what we can do in theater. So it's that kind of, yes, community that theater provides, but I don't know that that's going to salve this terror that I think a lot of us are experiencing right now.
Well, I do think that the play has a real sort of innate warmth to it, and sort of their sort of work towards connection and deeper connection is a part of that. Um, so I want to thank you so much for the play, for joining the podcast, for reuniting with me 10 years after you taught me. Yeah,
It's a
and
pleasure, Dan, really.
thank you
Thank
so
you for
much.
asking, and thank you for your well-prepared questions. I
Mhm.
appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Present Stage Conversations with Theater Writers, or perhaps watching this episode of The Present Stage Conversations with Theater Writers. Please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Please subscribe on YouTube, because whoever listens to this first, we're at 0 subscribers. So would love to have your support, since this is day one of the YouTube experience, or the YouTube experiment, as the case may be. You can also leave a 5-star rating or review. On YouTube, you can leave a comment, which is pretty cool. Would love to engage with those. And most importantly, keep seeing theater. You can follow us at The Present Stage on Instagram. And hope you'll tune in next time for an overseas special edition episode, a conversation with the writer and composer of a very exciting award-winning musical in London. You can guess which, and tune in next week to find out. Take care.